Sarah hated Friday evenings at the grocery store. The crowding, the noisy kids, shopping carts blocking the aisles, and endless lines at the checkout counters. But after a long work week, she only had the energy for a quick run to the store near her place, not to drive to a quieter, but farther one. She maneuvered her cart between the shelves, trying to find the right sauce, when she suddenly stopped short. Her heart skipped a beat, then pounded in a frantic rhythm. Amidst the crowd of faces rushing past, she saw him. He was standing by the wine shelf, carefully examining the labels, and his profile was so familiar it took her breath away. The same hair, a little longer than she remembered, but still the same dark blonde shade, the same curve of his neck, the same aura. Despite the years that separated them, she recognized him instantly, with the same absolute certainty with which she once knew the touch of his hand. Andrew. She hadn't seen him, it seemed, in an eternity. After their breakup, which was painful and final, they had deliberately avoided any contact. Mutual friends knew about it and didn't try to bring them together. Social media, she wasn't sure if he was on it, as her profile was private, and she hadn't dared to look for him. Each had gone their separate way, building a new life on the ruins of what was. And now, in the middle of the chaos of a regular grocery store, their paths had crossed again. She wanted to turn around and run. Abandon the cart, flee the store as if nothing had happened. But her feet felt rooted to the floor. She stood there, looking at him, and felt the past wash over her in a wave, memories of laughter, of nights spent together, of plans for the future, of the pain of saying goodbye. He chose a bottle of wine and turned around. Their eyes met. The same surprise appeared on his face as on hers. His eyes, those same gray eyes she once knew by heart, widened for a moment and then reflected a whole palette of emotions: shock, disbelief, slight panic, and something else that she didn't dare to name. Sarah? His voice was a little hoarse, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. Hi, Andrew. Her own voice sounded foreign and too quiet. He walked closer, pushing his cart. Yes, he had a cart too. It was ridiculously mundane. He looked good. Older, of course, with faintly visible lines near his eyes that weren't there before. But still the same Andrew she knew and loved. You're here, he asked, as if doubting the reality of what was happening. I live here, nearby, she replied. What about you? Didn't expect to see you in this neighborhood. I moved recently too, he said. Apartment not far from here. Looks like we're neighbors now. The words sounded absurd. Neighbors? After everything? In a grocery store? Life had a strange sense of humor. An awkward pause followed. What do former lovers, who haven't seen each other in years, say after a chance encounter between shelves of alcohol and pasta? How are you? He asked, his gaze cautious. Good, she nodded. You look good too. It was true, and it hurt a little to admit it. Thanks, his gaze lingered on her face. Sarah felt her cheeks flush again. She tried to look casual, but knew she probably looked flustered. She remembered his story about choice and betrayal from the previous narrative. Was it just a made-up tale? Or was it his way of telling her something about himself, about the reason for their breakup, when they were talking about scary stories? The thought flashed in her mind and immediately vanished, drowned in the chaos of the moment. Listen, Andrew began, and his expression became more decisive. This is an unusual meeting, but maybe we could talk? Not here, of course. He gestured to the hustle and bustle around them. Maybe somewhere? Grab coffee? Or wine? He suggested wine. He was standing by the wine shelf when she saw him. The idea felt symbolic. Wine relaxes, loosens tongues, brings back memories. It was risky, very risky. But a part of Sarah, the part that still held scars and unspoken questions, couldn't refuse. She looked at her cart, at his cart, at the crowd around them. All of it suddenly seemed insignificant. She hesitated. I guess Yes, I guess we could. His face lit up with a faint smile. The kind of smile that once could make her do anything. Great, he said. I'll just check out quickly. You too. Yeah, she nodded. Meet by the exit in 10 minutes? Okay, Sarah agreed. He nodded again, his gaze lingering on her for another moment, as if trying to remember her as she was now. Then, with a surprised and slightly excited smile, he headed towards the checkout. Sarah stood there, watching him go, feeling adrenaline surge through her veins. 10 minutes. 10 minutes to compose herself, gather her thoughts, and prepare for a conversation that could take her back to the past and turn her present upside down. Coming home. No, not home. Coming back to him. And to the person she was when she was with him. Sarah stood by the supermarket exit, holding only a small bag with the essentials. She had left the rest of the groceries in the cart, forgotten in her haste and confusion. The air of the autumn evening was crisp and cool, sharply contrasting with the stuffy atmosphere of the store. She tried to compose her thoughts, but they fluttered chaotically like trapped butterflies. Andrew, here, invited her for wine. After so many years, 10 minutes later, he appeared, with a grocery bag in his hand, a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. In his gaze, the surprise of their meeting was still evident. Not cold, he asked, stopping beside her. No, she replied. Where should we go? He looked around. There's a small wine bar nearby. Quiet, usually not too crowded at this hour. Would that work? Yes, perfect, she agreed. She wanted a place where they could talk calmly, without extra eyes or noise. They walked side by side on the sidewalk. The distance between them seemed measured by years of separation, close enough to feel each other's presence, but also far enough not to touch. Every step felt awkward. What to talk about? The weather? Politics? How their lives had turned out without each other. Have you lived in this neighborhood long? Sarah asked, trying to start a conversation. A few months, Andrew replied. Changed jobs. Decided to move closer. And you've been living here the whole time. Almost, she said. After we broke up, I rented somewhere else for a while and then bought this apartment. Been here for, maybe 7 or 8 years. 7 or 8 years. Numbers that sounded like a sentence. 7 or 8 years of life in which he wasn't present. The bar turned out to be exactly as Andrew described. Small, cozy, with dim lighting, shelves lined with bottles, and a few tables. Quiet jazz played. An ideal spot for awkward conversations and reviving memories. They sat at a table by the window. A waiter brought menus. Red or white? Andrew asked, flipping through the list. Red, Sarah replied. Like before. His gaze lingered on her. Like before. Unless you want to try something new. She smiled. Easily, naturally. The first genuine smile of the evening. Tonight, something new might be good. He ordered a bottle of dry red wine they had never drunk together. It seemed symbolic. Something new, but in a familiar category. While the waiter was fulfilling the order, silence fell again. Sarah watched him, trying to understand what had changed. He seemed more calm, confident, less impulsive than the young man she knew? Or was it just a facade? He was watching her too. Evaluating? Remembering? She wondered what he saw. The same girl he had shared so much with? Or a completely different woman? You look good, Sarah, he said suddenly, softly. You too, Andrew, she replied, feeling herself blush again. The waiter brought the wine, opened the bottle, poured it into glasses. A ritual that added formality to the moment. Andrew took his glass, carefully swirled the wine, inhaled the aroma. Anna did the same. They raised their glasses. To meeting, Andrew suggested. To meeting, Sarah agreed. The first sip. The taste of the wine was rich, deep. It seemed to settle somewhere in her chest, mixing with a sense of anxiety and something else. Nostalgia? So, tell me, Andrew said, setting down his glass. How have these years been? How have the years been? Sarah repeated. Where to start? With work? With travels? With failed attempts at new relationships? With loneliness? A bit of everything, she began cautiously. Working. I was just starting at that marketing agency back then. Now I'm a department head there. Wow, Andrew looked genuinely surprised. That's great, Sarah. I'm happy for you. You were always driven. Her heart warmed at his praise. He remembered that. Remembered her that way. Thanks, she said. What about you? What are you doing? I'm in software development, he replied. Working at a large IT company. I've been working on one project for the past few years. That's why I moved here, closer to the office. They talked about work, career paths, changes in their fields. It was a safe topic. It allowed them to maintain distance, even though they were only sitting at a small table. They talked about travels, where they had gone, what they had seen. About mutual acquaintances, carefully, without unnecessary details, avoiding the names of those who might be a sore subject. During this conversation, which seemed superficial, much more was actually happening. They were studying each other, looking for familiar features in changed faces, comparing the person sitting opposite them with the image that lived in their memory. Every word had a double meaning. Every look was filled with the unsaid. Sarah felt the tension slowly ease under the influence of the wine and the bar's atmosphere. In its place came another feeling, quiet nostalgia, a strange sense of closeness with a person who was once a part of herself and now felt almost like a stranger. And beneath it all, a faint but persistent pull, a reminder of the passion that once connected them. Andrew poured them more wine. His hand lingered on the bottle for a moment. He felt it too. This tension. This return of the past. Weird, isn't it? He said, his gaze fixed somewhere past her. Meeting like this. After so many years. It's like time hasn't passed at all. It has, Sarah replied quietly. A lot of time has passed, Andrew. I know, he turned his head towards her. There was sadness in his eyes, but also curiosity. It's just, some things stay. What exactly stays? Memories? Feelings? Scars? Or maybe that same spark they had tried to bury for years. This night promised to be long, and the wine was just beginning to reveal its secrets. Their shared secrets. Coming home. The conversation about work and travel gradually ran its course. They poured themselves more wine. The silence that followed was no longer as awkward as at the beginning. It was filled with each other's presence, with glances that lingered a little longer than politeness required, and with the awareness of a shared history that hung in the air like an invisible mist. Do you remember? Andrew began, and Sarah froze. She knew the deep dive was about to start. Do you remember our first trip to the coast? He asked, looking away as if seeing the scene before him. That tiny little cottage we barely found? And how it rained all night, and we just sat on the porch, listening to it and talking about everything. Sarah smiled, nodding. The memory was vivid. She remembered the smell of the salty air, the sound of rain on the old roof, his voice in the darkness, the feeling of absolute carefree happiness from just being together. I remember, she said softly. And how we went to the beach in the morning, and there was fog, and it felt like we were the only ones in the world. Yeah, his eyes returned to her, and that same warm light she once loved so much appeared in them. We were the only ones in the world back then. They started reminiscing more. Little things that should have faded from memory, but turned out to be etched deep inside. The first date at that strange little cafe with awful coffee, but an incredible atmosphere. Late-night walks in the city when they felt like they owned the streets. How he taught her to ride a bike after years of not riding, and she kept falling. And he laughed but patiently picked her up. How they tried to cook something complicated together and kept arguing in the kitchen, and then ate it and said it was the most delicious thing they'd ever tasted. Each memory was like a precious stone pulled from the chest of the past. Some sparkled with joy, others had a faint, sad undertone, a precursor to what happened later. But even the sad memories of the past with him were somehow dear, because it was their past. "And do you remember going to that outdoor concert?" Andrew asked, sipping his wine. And suddenly a thunderstorm started. Everyone ran for cover, but we just stood under that old tree and laughed, soaked to the bone. "And how you gave me your jacket, even though you were freezing?" Sarah added. She remembered it. Remembered his care, his warmth, the feeling of safety next to him. They talked for hours. Time seemed to cease to exist. The other patrons in the bar, the quiet jazz, the street noise outside the window, it all became a blurry background. There were only the two of them and their memories, coming alive with each new glass of wine. During this reminiscing, other moments slipped between them. Glances that lingered on lips. A light touch of hands on the wine glasses simultaneously. A slight tilt of the head to hear better in the quiet. An unspoken desire hiding beneath the layers of nostalgia. Sarah looked at Andrew and saw not only the adult man sitting opposite her, but also the young guy she had known once. His gestures, his laugh, the expression in his eyes when he recalled something pleasant, it was all so familiar, so dear. For a moment, it seemed like they hadn't broken up at all, that they had simply continued a conversation that started years ago. "We were happy, weren't we?" Andrew said softly, and a note of sadness entered his voice. Sarah nodded. "Yes, we were. Happy and a little foolish," he added, looking at her. It was a hint about what happened next, about the reason for their breakup. They were approaching a dangerous line. Memories of a happy past inevitably led to memories of how that happiness was destroyed. She took a sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. Was she ready to touch upon that topic? Open old wounds? Or was it better to leave everything as it was, leave this meeting as a pleasant, albeit slightly sad, dive into the past? But his gaze was so sincere, his face so close, despite the years separating them. She felt she couldn't avoid it. Their story was unfinished. And perhaps now, here, they could try to find at least a partial answer. "Maybe," she said, her voice barely audible. "Or maybe, just young. And didn't know how to appreciate what we had." He sighed, long and deep. "Maybe," he repeated. His gaze became serious, the lightness of the memories gone. They stood on the threshold of the most important part of their conversation. The wine in their glasses seemed to change taste. From pleasantly dry, it became bitter. The atmosphere in the bar, which had seemed cozy, suddenly felt a little stuffy. The past they had so carefully taken out of the chest now stood before them in all its complexity. And the most complex part was what led them here, the reason their paths diverged. And whether those reasons were still relevant now. The silence after Andrew's words about something staying and the mention of their foolishness became heavy. The memories of a happy past that had been floating in the air suddenly seemed to shrink, giving way to the ghost of their breakup. It stood between them, invisible but palpable, like a third conversationalist at the table. Sarah took another sip of wine, trying to steel herself. This conversation was inevitable if they wanted to understand why they were sitting here now, looking at each other across a chasm of years. "Why did we break up back then?" she asked softly, her gaze fixed on his hands clutching the wine glass. It was easier to look at his hands than into his eyes. Andrew exhaled, as if preparing for a deep dive. "Why?" he repeated. "There were a lot of reasons, weren't there?" "Not just one." She nodded. "Yes, a lot. We were young," he began, his voice low and thoughtful. "Very young. And foolish. We didn't know how to talk. We didn't know how to listen," Sarah added. It was an old grievance of hers that still sat somewhere deep inside. It often felt like he didn't hear her, didn't understand her needs, her fears. Andrew nodded. "Yeah, you're right. I often didn't listen. Or I listened but didn't truly hear. I was too focused on myself, on my plans, my desires." He paused, looking at her directly now. "I'm sorry for that." His sincerity surprised her. She hadn't expected an apology. The old grievance loosened its grip a little. "Me too," she said. "I was probably too demanding. I wanted you to be who I imagined you were, not who you were." "No," he countered, shaking his head. "You wanted me to be better, more attentive, more present. And you were right." He looked away. Remember that situation with my job? When I disappeared for a whole week preparing for that project and completely forgot your birthday." Sarah flinched. That memory was one of the most painful. It was the moment she felt completely unimportant and insignificant in his life. "I remember." Her voice was quiet. "It was awful," Andrew said, his face looking guilty. "I was so focused on myself, on my stress. I didn't even think about what it meant to you. It was selfish and stupid. I'm so sorry I hurt you back then." The words poured out of him, sincere, painful. They were a balm on an old wound, but at the same time forced it to open up again. Sarah felt tears welling up. She blinked, trying to hold them back. "It felt like the end back then," she said, remembering that evening, her tears, his bewilderment. "It was the end," he agreed. "The end of that us. The end of how we built relationships. We reached a point where we couldn't anymore. Couldn't understand each other. Couldn't give what the other needed." "There was also that story," Sarah said, not looking at him. "The story he might have mentioned in his spooky tale at the old house. The story about his choice." Andrew tensed. His smile completely disappeared. "What story?" he asked, though he seemed to know what she was talking about. "About your friend," she said, looking up at him. She saw something in his gaze that confirmed her suspicion. It wasn't just a made-up story. It was something real, connected to him. Or was it? Was it about something else? About something with us? Andrew was silent. For a long time. He looked at her, and his eyes reflected some old suffering, hesitation. It's more complicated," he finally said, his voice so quiet she had to lean in to hear. There was a situation that involved me. And something I did. I made a bad choice, not directly towards you. But it affected me. And maybe it reflected in our relationship. Back then, there was a lot I couldn't tell you. I was bound by circumstances. And it distanced me from you." He didn't speak specifically, but Sarah felt that something significant lay behind these words. Some event that forced him to change, to withdraw, perhaps to feel guilty. And it affected them. "You never told me about that," she said. "Couldn't," he simply replied. "And I was scared, I guess, that you wouldn't understand. Or would judge me." This new, unexpected facet of their breakup, his secret, his pain, his choice, added complexity to their shared history. It wasn't just about inattention or different goals. It was about something darker, something he carried within him that perhaps became one of the hidden reasons why their connection broke. They sat in silence, processing these new pieces of the puzzle. The wine in their glasses warmed their hands, but the conversation sent a chill down their spines. They were reopening old wounds, and it was painful, but at the same time, necessary? As if only by going through this pain could they understand who they were now and what their story meant. So, Andrew said softly, breaking the silence. "There was my inattention, your high expectations, my secret. Our youth, our lack of experience. All of it together. A volatile mix." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "A volatile mix." But sitting there, looking at him, at his wrinkles, at the expression in his eyes, Sarah understood that the reasons for their breakup no longer seemed as simple as they once did. Life is more complex. People are more complex. And perhaps what felt like the end of the world back then was simply an inevitable stage for two young people carrying burdens the other didn't know about. The conversation about the past reached its peak. They touched upon the most painful moments, said what they perhaps should have said years ago. The air was electric with emotional tension. The question now was what to do with all of this. With these memories, these revelations, this unexpected closeness that arose in the middle of the night over glasses of wine. Coming home. The conversation about the reasons for the breakup left a heavy, yet also cleansing feeling. The words spoken, the mistakes acknowledged, the secrets revealed, all of it changed the dynamic between Sarah and Andrew. They were no longer just exes who happened to meet. They were two people who had dared to look into their shared, painful past, and it had brought them closer. Andrew poured more wine. The bottle was almost empty. Time flew by unnoticed, although it felt like only a moment had passed since they sat down at this table. Enough about the past? Andrew asked quietly, raising his gaze to her. Enough, Sarah agreed. The past was complicated. It was time to return to the present. So, how's your life now? He asked, his voice cautious. This question could open new, potentially painful topics of other relationships, other people who had entered their lives after they went their separate ways. Sarah hesitated. Talking about her personal life was difficult. Especially with him. I'm doing well, she began carefully. Stable job, friends. I try to travel when I can. And your personal life? He asked directly, his gaze sharp. She took a sip of wine. There were relationships, she said honestly. A few. But didn't work out. Nothing serious lately. She didn't go into detail. She didn't want to talk about her failures, about how she involuntarily compared every new person to him, and how those comparisons always fell short. Was it his shadow that haunted her? I understand, Andrew said softly. That's similar. He was also alone? Sarah didn't dare to ask directly. But his words, his tone, it seemed so. After us. I had relationships too, he continued, as if reading her mind. Long-term ones. I even thought that was it. But he paused, looking somewhere into space. But something was off. Like, I couldn't fully open up. Couldn't let something go. Maybe the past. He turned his eyes back to her. Maybe our past? His words sounded like a confession. They both carried the weight of their shared history. It had affected them, their subsequent attempts to build relationships. Do you think we broke something so important back then that we couldn't recover? Sarah asked, a note of bitterness in her voice. I don't know, Andrew answered honestly. Maybe we just changed each other. So much that we then looked for something specific. What was between us? And couldn't find it? Silence fell. They sat, looking at each other, and in that silence echoed the unspoken question, what if? What if what they were looking for in others had been here all along, between them? What if, having gone through years of separation, through their own experiences, they were finally ready to understand each other, accept each other as they were now? The wine in their glasses was finished. But neither moved to order more. The atmosphere had shifted. From the nostalgia and pain of talking about the past, they had moved to the tension of the present and the indecision about the future. Andrew reached across the table and carefully covered her hand with his. His skin was warm. This touch was different from the one in the supermarket. Then it was surprise. Now it was a conscious seeking of closeness. Sarah, his voice was low and emotional. You know, I often thought about you. Her heart clenched. I thought about you too, Andrew. And I always wondered, what if? He gently stroked her hand with his thumb. What if we had been a little older? A little wiser? What if I hadn't been such an egoist? She looked at their hands lying on the table, his larger palm over hers, fingers intertwined. A symbol of their meeting, their shared history. We can't change the past, Sarah said softly. No, he agreed. But we can. Decide what to do with the present. His gaze was so intense it was hard for her to breathe. Desire was in his eyes. Not just physical, although that too was present, palpable in the tension between them. It was a desire to understand, a desire to reconnect, a desire to find out if it was possible to get back what was lost. She felt her own body respond. A long-dormant passion slowly awakened, spreading warmth through her veins. The closeness of his hand, his gaze, his quiet voice, it all affected her more powerfully than any wine. "What are you proposing?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She felt they were on the verge of something important, something that could change their lives again. Andrew was silent, looking into her eyes. There was no hesitation in him now. There was determination and a question. A question he didn't speak aloud, but which Sarah read completely in his eyes. A question to which she herself didn't yet know the answer, but felt her heart was already leaning towards one option. Their hands were still intertwined on the table, like a single entity. The connection that had been rekindled was strong and powerful. After all the years, after all the experiences, they found themselves on a threshold again. This time, on the threshold of a possible shared future. And the decision whether to cross that threshold had to be made now. He slowly leaned towards her. Her heart pounded even faster. The whole world again condensed to this small table, to their faces drawing closer. He looked at her lips, and she at his. The unspoken desire that had been building for hours was now almost unbearable. Coming home. His face approached slowly, as if through a thick fog of years that was gradually dissipating. Andrew's eyes were focused on her lips, and they held so many emotions: hesitation, hope, deep longing for the past, and a fierce desire for the present. Sarah froze, her own breath caught in her throat. Time stopped. The bar's noise, the quiet music, distant voices, it all blended into an indistinct background that receded. There was only this moment, this distance of a few inches between them, a tension that had been building for hours and was now almost unbearable. She felt the heat radiating from his body, the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with the smell of wine. Her gaze wandered over his face, the same cheekbones she knew by heart, the shadow of stubble barely visible in the dim light, the line of his lips approaching her own. She wanted to lean forward, close this distance that felt infinite, but her legs and body seemed to refuse. All her will was focused on simply breathing. When their lips finally touched, an electric current shot through Sarah's body. It was a soft, tentative touch at first, as if he was checking if she would push him away, if this moment was real. She responded immediately, closing her eyes, surrendering to the sensation. Everything unspoken, all the years of separation, all the pain and all the nostalgia that had accumulated, all of it poured into this kiss. His hand, which had been holding hers, squeezed tighter. His other hand gently cupped her cheek, his thumb softly stroking the skin near her ear. This touch was so familiar, so dear, that tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. It was Andrew's touch, the one she remembered from the time when their bodies and souls were one. The kiss deepened. Tentativeness gave way to passion. Their lips moved more confidently, his tongue lightly touched hers, asking for access. She responded, opening up to him, as she had so long ago. The taste of wine on his lips, his breath mixing with her own, it all swirled in a whirlwind of sensations that awakened long-dormant emotions. She felt Andrew leaning closer, his body pressing against hers despite the table between them. Her hands, which had been resting on her lap, rose on their own and wrapped around his neck. Her fingers tangled in his hair, a little longer than she remembered, but still just as soft. She pulled him closer, trying to eliminate any distance that still remained between them. In that moment, the world outside their small bubble of intimacy ceased to exist. There was no bar, no other people, no past or future. There was only here and now, the two of them, their lips intertwined in a kiss, and their bodies yearning for closeness. It was a kiss they had waited years for, not even fully realizing how much they needed it. A kiss of confession, a kiss of memory, a kiss of question. When they finally pulled back to catch their breath, their foreheads were touching. Their eyes were closed. Their breathing was rapid, their hearts pounding in unison. Sarah felt the warmth of his breath on her face, his hands still holding her. "Sarah," Andrew whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. She couldn't reply, only tightened her arms around his neck. Her body trembled, whether from the intensity of the moment or from awakened desire. He slowly opened his eyes. Their gazes met up close. In his eyes, there was surprise, relief, and a deep, all-encompassing feeling that made Sarah freeze. It was more than just passion. It was something deeper, something that had survived years of separation. He began, but didn't finish. I know, Sarah said softly. He pulled back slightly, but his hands still held her face. His gaze lingered on her features, as if he was memorizing her as she was now in this moment. That was. Yes, she exhaled, understanding without words what he wanted to say. It was much more than just a kiss. It was a bridge across the years, connecting their past to their present. Andrew slowly took his hands from her face and lowered them to the table, but his fingers immediately found her hand and gently squeezed it. Silence between them was again filled with the unspoken, but now it was a different unspoken. Not the painful burden of the past, but hesitation in the face of a future that had suddenly become uncertain and tempting. They sat like that for some time, holding hands, looking at each other, each lost in their own thoughts and the realization of what had just happened. The years-long wall that had separated them had cracked, perhaps even completely crumbled. The fire of past passion, which they thought had died out, suddenly ignited with new force, bright and unpredictable. A waiter walked past, giving them a quick, indifferent glance. The other bar patrons continued their conversations. The outside world reminded them of its existence. But for Sarah and Andrew, it still felt distant. Andrew looked at his watch, then at the empty glasses and bottle. The bar closes soon, he said quietly. These simple words brought them back to reality. The night wasn't endless. Their meeting couldn't last forever in this place. A decision had to be made. What next? Go home? Each to their own, carrying this moment in memory? Or take a risk and step into the unknown? Andrew's gaze met hers again. There was no hesitation in him now. There was determination and a question. A question he didn't voice aloud, but which Sarah read completely in his eyes. A question to which she herself didn't yet know the answer, but felt her heart was already leaning towards one option. Their hands were still intertwined on the table, like a single entity. The connection that had been rekindled was strong and powerful. After all the years, after all the experiences, they found themselves on a threshold again. This time, on the threshold of a possible shared future. And the decision whether to cross that threshold had to be made now. Coming home. Andrew's words about the bar closing shattered the bubble they were in. They looked at each other, and their eyes reflected a shared realization. Time and space had reasserted themselves. This wasn't just the end of an evening. It was a moment of truth after hours of memories, revelations, and a kiss that had shaken the very foundations of their beings. He was still holding her hand, and that simple touch was an anchor, preventing them from drifting away from each other into a whirlwind of doubts and fears. The waiter walked past their table, politely asking if they wanted anything else before closing. It was a gentle hint that it was time to leave. Andrew glanced at Sarah, then at the waiter. No, thank you, he said, his voice firm. We'll be going. He stood up, still holding her hand. It felt to Sarah as if he was asking for her consent not with words, but with action. She silently rose as well. She picked up her bag, her coat. Andrew's hand was still clasping hers, and it felt right, incredibly right after long years of emptiness. They walked out of the bar onto the cool autumn street. The night city was quiet, only distant lights and the sound of cars reminded them that life was still going on. They stopped by the entrance, breathing in the fresh air after the stuffy atmosphere of the bar and the intensity of their conversation. Your groceries, did you leave them in the car? Andrew asked, remembering the supermarket bags. Sarah laughed, nervously, but genuinely. My cart is still in the store, she replied. I only took the small bag with bread and milk. Andrew smiled back, and his smile this time was free of any tension, warm, genuine, the same smile that once could make her move mountains. "Then you need groceries," he said, as if it were the most important thing in the world. "And maybe a place to cook them." His words were simple, but the meaning behind them was immense. He wasn't just offering to share groceries, he was offering a continuation. Offering to find out where this night, this meeting, this kiss could lead them. Sarah looked at him, her heart pounding furiously. Fear and doubt were still somewhere nearby, but the desire that had awakened and the sense of closeness that had returned were stronger. She saw in his eyes not just a fleeting impulse, but a deep, conscious yearning. "Maybe," she said softly, repeating his word from their conversation. He took a step closer, not letting go of her hand. Now they stood right next to each other, just like they used to. "I live close by," he reminded her, his voice quiet but full of certainty. Sarah nodded. She knew. He was her neighbor. Life had come full circle, bringing them back to the starting point, but completely different. "Let's go," she said, and it was a decision. A decision to surrender to the moment, to trust her feelings, to take a risk. He squeezed her hand tighter and led her down the street. Their footsteps echoed in the city's night silence, synchronized, just like they used to be. It was a strange feeling, walking beside him after so many years, feeling the warmth of his hand, knowing that they weren't just walking aimlessly, but walking towards something. They didn't walk far. Andrew's building turned out to be modern, with a minimalist design, sharply contrasting with the older buildings from her previous story, removing the specific contrast mention as it relates to the previous story. The entrance was clean and well-lit. They went up to his floor, entered his apartment. It was spacious, bright, with a minimalist decor. It smelled fresh and of Andrew. This was his space, his life, built without her. But now she was here, in his space. Andrew carefully placed the bag of groceries in the kitchen. The apartment was quiet. Only the echo of their footsteps and their quickening breaths. Tension was rising again, but this time it was a different tension. Not from uncertainty, but from anticipation. He turned back to Sarah, who was standing in the middle of the living room, looking around. He placed his hands on her shoulders. "Are you sure?" he asked, his gaze serious. Sarah looked into his eyes. She wasn't 100% sure. You never can be in moments like these. But she knew she didn't want to leave. Didn't want to let him go again. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm sure." His face relaxed, a smile appeared. He leaned down and kissed her again, this time without hesitation, deep, yielding. It was a kiss promise, a kiss discovery. The night was just beginning for the two of them. A night that was meant to be a continuation of their story, perhaps a new beginning, or maybe just a bright flare of a long-extinguished fire. But in this moment, standing in his apartment, in his arms, Sarah felt they had made the right choice. The choice not to run from the past and not to hide from the present. The choice to take a risk and find out what dawn might bring. What would happen next, they didn't know. Would this evening grow into something lasting? Would the past reasons for their breakup make themselves known again? Could they build a new relationship on the ruins of the old one? There were many questions. But in this moment, as their bodies pressed together and the kiss grew more passionate, the answers to those questions seemed distant and unimportant. All that mattered was that they had found each other again. And the coming home, which had begun with a chance encounter in the grocery store, was now taking a completely different, unpredictable turn.